When I poured my walls, my concrete walls, I had poured some walls before, but they were a little smaller. We used a different system that was made out of wood, and I wasn't in charge of the job. So, because of that, there were some details that I had to learn along the way. And this video is going to show you the details I learned, basically to help you with your project and to help you get some confidence to know that this is something you can do if you're eager to do it yourself. Some people feel like they can't do this type of project, and that's totally understandable. There's a lot of cost involved, and the last thing you want is for something to go wrong. So, in this video, we're going to focus on 10 main points to help you build some confidence so that when the day comes to pour your own walls for your project, you'll have the knowledge you need to get it done. So, your footers, in all honesty, they might possibly be the most important part of your concrete wall. It's the foundation of your building, it's the foundation of your walls, and any mistakes that are made in this process is going to cause you bigger issues later down the road. The reason I say this is because these Simon forms, they're made of steel. If you ever put an engine together, you know that metal doesn't give much, if any, room for error. It goes where it wants to go. So your footers, they need to be as flat as you can possibly get them. If you're able to form your footers so the height is preset with the top of your wood form, that's ideal. Most applications, that's not feasible, or you might feel like it would take too much extra time. But either way, whether you're forming your footer out of wood or you're digging it, be sure to get your footers as flat as possible at that predetermined height. And along with this footer category, we're going to talk about rebar placement. The thinner your wall thickness is, the more accurate your rebar uprights need to be because the target area of the center of the wall is smaller. So a small trick I did was I set up 2x4s that represented the center of the wall. That way I knew if I tied my uprights to that board, it would guarantee be dead center of the wall. The 2x4 bottom plate, it's what you'll place the concrete form on, and it represents the starting point of the outside of your wall. A nice trick that I like to do is put a Tapcon screw on the outside wall line, tie a string as low as you can to the footer, as close to the footer as you can. You tie it to that screw, you repeat it on the other side, and then you use a spray can and you spray can over the string, and this will leave a super nice line that will endure the weather. And nice part about this is you can do it without needing a second hand. You can do it by yourself. Chalk line would take two people, so that's kind of nice. After you have the exterior walls line clearly marked, you can start to install that bottom plate. And if your 2x4 has any bends in it, you can just straighten up the board as you drill a hole into the plate and into your footer. And then in that hole, you would just install a Tapcon concrete screw. And I would recommend doing this every 3 to 4 feet. That'd be plenty strong enough. So you got your footers poured, your rebar uprights, they're in the right spot, dead center of your wall, your bottom plates installed properly. Now you're ready for your form rental. And I used a company called FormTech. I sent their salesman a hand drawing of what I was wanting, and he converted it into an actual quote unquote blueprint showing where each form goes. And he calculates all of the pieces you'll need, all your snap ties, your turnbuckles, your wedge bolts. And along with that blueprint, he'll send you a simple cross section that will explain the proper placement of your snap ties and your turnbuckles. One of my favorite construction YouTubers, Central Craftsman, he said that one of the hardest parts of construction is moving the material where it needs to go. And he's definitely not wrong when it comes to these forms. Ideally, you want to place them as close to where they're going to be installed. You want them as close to that point as possible. But sometimes, due to terrain and other factors, you're not able to do that. So these forms are not extremely heavy. I really wanted to weigh a 2 foot by 8 foot form when I had these, but I wasn't able to actually weigh it. But as you can see, one guy, he can relatively easily move it around. So remember that blueprint your form rental company sent you. This is where it comes in handy, as it will basically break down where you will need to place each form along with your corner pieces, etc. Ideally, you install one end first, so like the outside or inside wall, and then you would tie your rebar cross sections at that point, and then you close it off. You set up the other side of the panels. For the bottom of the panel, the wall form, we used a 3/8 lag bolt to attach the bottom of the form to the 2x4 bottom plate. The form has 2 holes at the bottom that allows you to anchor it to that plate. Company, they'll give you, they should send you a form release agent that you'll just spray on each form before you put it up. Just be sure not to spray this on your rebar, because it will make the concrete not stick to it. Once your first panel is up, you can use a pretty cool fastener to connect the forms together. It's called a wedge bolt. You slide the wedge bolt into the side hole of the form, and you drop the other wedge bolt down into the initial wedge bolt you set, and you hammer it in. And what this does, it pinches those 2 forms together so that it's nice and tight. So as you pour your walls, pressure is going to build up quickly. This pressure is known as a hydrostatic pressure, which means the higher you pour your concrete, the more pressure is applied to the bottom of the form. And to compensate for this, you're going to use what they call a snap tie. Snap ties are designed to be removed after your wall is finished, and it's the only thing keeping that concrete from exploding your forms away from each other. Notice again in this cross section how there's more snap ties towards the bottom of the form compared to the top. That's because the pressure is greater at the bottom than at the top. And the equation on this is 150 pounds per foot of concrete that's poured into that form. Another little detail in setting your forms is that anything over 20 feet in length, you need to install a control joint. And this isn't any different than you would put in a sidewalk or a driveway. It's basically a weak point in your wall to force the concrete to crack in that location. And ideally, the crack will be exactly where you want it to. It'll crack where you want it to. So this part can be a little tricky at first if it's your first time doing it, but it's pretty simple once you see the proper placement of each item, mainly the section of the form that it gets installed to. These forms, they got a slot every foot going vertically, and normally those slots are for snap tie placement. But at the top, you'll need to utilize these holes to install your turnbuckles, your whaler brackets, along with your scaffolding brackets. So the turnbuckle and 2x4 brace does not hold any of the hydrostatic weight of the concrete, but it does need to be able to adjust the top of the wall after you pour to the top of your form in case there's any movement during pour. So you can basically replumb or adjust the top of that wall in or out to get it perfectly plumb. And because of this, you need to install 3 metal stakes that support it in an X pattern, along with one going straight down. And if you just install 1 or 2 stakes, these stakes will pull out of the ground most likely, rather than the wall being adjusted. And the whalers are placed at the top of the wall, and they line the panels so that they straighten up at the top. Remember, the bottom 2x4 plate aligns the bottom of the wall, and the whalers, they basically do the same thing at the top of the wall, so it's straight. The scaffolding is pretty much straightforward. You just place the scaffolding planks on the scaffold support, and if you're high up enough, I would definitely suggest installing some 2x4 uprights. That way you can create a railing so you don't fall off when you're pouring and setting up your whalers. This step is super important. Before you pour, you got to check your walls to make sure they haven't moved any. You know, sometimes it could take a couple days or until you're done forming and you're ready to pour. So you want to check your walls, make sure they haven't moved. And if they have, you can straighten them up, turning your turnbuckles. And this is pretty simple. Just put your hammer claw in that hole and twist it whichever way it needs to go, whether it's out or in. And if you're going to be building above your wall, like out of wood or something like that, then you want to make sure you have your J bolts or any type of anchors that you're wanting to use. Um, the ones I used, I installed them every 3 feet, and you'll set these after your wall is poured to the top. And there's a lot of different types of anchoring systems, so be sure to research which one will fit your application. Another trick that I myself didn't do, and I didn't do it frankly because I was slightly overwhelmed making sure everything was done properly, is you set a string line from corner to corner at the top of your wall form, and this will help you make sure your wall is as straight as it reasonably can be. So when you got some downtime setting up your forms, or even way before you rent your forms, you really want to pick a pump company that can help you with getting all that concrete where it's got to go. The pump company can either be super helpful with your job or create nightmares. So you want to make sure you pick one that you get along with and someone that's eager to help you get your job done. The first part about this process is figuring out how much concrete you need. I like to use a website called Concrete Calculator. I'll put the link in the description. But if you just Google search Concrete Calculator, it should be the second or third option. So keep in mind, a concrete wall it's just a slab that's standing straight up and down, right? So figure out the total length of your walls, the thickness, and the height. And if you have any man door openings or windows or vent holes, um, I wouldn't necessarily calculate them out of your final figure, because it's better to have a little bit too much concrete than not enough. So always try to over order. And you're going to have a lot of money in this project, so a couple $100, it's not going to hurt. The next tip could be the most important tip of the whole video. Make sure you talk with your batch plant and ask them about an additive called super plasticizer. This additive makes your concrete looser, or it makes it wet without adding water. So the water would make your wall not as strong, but this additive makes it wet or loose, but you don't lose your strength. And these batch plants, they're in the business of selling concrete. So tell them about your project and be open and ask them for any additional advice they might have. So I've poured quite a bit of concrete over the years, and my wall pour specifically was by far the easiest pour I've ever done. It was also the most concrete I poured in such a little time. But it was also super stressful. And the reason for this was because 100% of that responsibility for my job was on my shoulders, including the cost, right? So, but I feel like if you followed some of these steps, then you really shouldn't have too much to worry about. But it's still understandable if you're nervous. So it's showtime. Everything's all lined up. You double checked everything. The batch plant, pump truck are on the same page. There's just a few more pointers that I'm going to give you to make sure you're 100% ready and confident so you can pour your walls. What I'm about to tell you, your pump company is already well aware of. But the more people with insight on your project, the better. Remember how we discussed that the concrete is poured into the wall forms, the weight builds up quickly, right? 150 pounds per foot of concrete. All that weight's pushing on the wall, on your wall form. So because of this, it's highly not recommended to pour your walls all at once. If you were to do that, the snap ties would get overloaded with pressure, then your wall forms would separate, explode out from the pressure, and you would have a major mess on your hands. Not to mention the loss of money and time to hit the reset button on your project. So to counter this, you simply pour your concrete in what is known as lifts. Lifts, they're typically poured in 2 or 4 feet high sections around the entire wall. Then after you pour your first lift around the whole wall, you start over, pouring your second lift. And you keep repeating that process until you reach the top of your forms. And this is where that super plasticizer additive will come in handy. It will fill in the form almost perfectly uniform to where you will have minimal air holes in your wall. And after you pour 2 lifts, you want to stick a concrete vibrator down into the concrete every 2 feet or so and slide it back up out of the concrete. Doing this will guarantee that the 2 lifts mix together and they become one solid piece of material, concrete. As you keep pouring up higher and higher, the concrete at the bottom of the wall eventually will support some of its weight, if not all of its weight, and you won't risk any blowouts because the concrete at the bottom is already starting to get hard, right? And when you vibrate the concrete, be sure to not vibrate it too much, because you could temporarily loosen the concrete, and all of that weight would be put against your forms. And once you reach the top of your wall forms, you can double check the height with a laser level. And if everything's flat and you're happy with it, then you can set those anchors, your anchor bolts, if you have any. Man, I'll be honest, if you've made it this far along with your project, you really got something you should be proud of. It was a lot of hard work, a lot of dedication that's finally paid off. So most of these form rental companies, they rent their forms for 30 days, but the longer you can leave those forms on the wall, the better. This will allow the concrete to cure slower, which will make it stronger in the long run. And I definitely say the hardest part about stripping these forms is the inside corner pieces. So I really hope this information was helpful to somebody considering doing this type of project on their own. I was thinking about in my next video explaining how I got the stone pattern on our walls and maybe giving some details on that part of the project that I learned. If that's something you'd like to see, please consider subscribing and like the video. And any additional pointers that maybe I've missed or overlooked, feel free to put them down in the comments. That way we can get as much input as possible so people can get their walls poured. All right. Thanks for watching.